There was another time where I went to translate on a battery, and the guy said, and I understood everything, except he goes, yeah, and then he grabbed a cat, gato, and he hit me in the head with the cat. And I'm just really puzzled, and I repeat it back. You got hit with a gato. He goes, yeah, hit me in the head with a gato. And he's bleeding. So I'm just confused. And the deputy's like, what is he saying? I'm like, I think he was hit in the head with a cat. He goes, you're not very good at this, are you? So then I learned that the tire jack is called a gato. But I learned it on that call.
Welcome to the Hey Chaplain podcast. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. Hey Chaplain is an officer wellness podcast produced for cops and covers topics like your career, wellness, and law enforcement culture. On Hey Chaplain, you'll hear from dispatchers and federal agents, sheriffs and U.S. Marshals, as well as the occasional patrol officer from my hometown of Kansas City. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain share their hard-earned wisdom so that police officers everywhere can survive and thrive. Today I'm talking to Paul Kurtzweil, better known on YouTube as QRoo Paul. Paul's a retired deputy who moved to Mexico, but now finds himself teaching Spanish on YouTube. I wanted to talk to Paul for multiple reasons. First, I think he can genuinely help those of us who are stuck in the process of learning Spanish. But secondly, I wanted you to hear from a retired LEO who is very successfully navigating his second chapter. You might not want to teach a second language on YouTube, but Paul gives fantastic insights about what to do with yourself after law enforcement. Here's Paul Kurtzweil. Hello, Paul. How are you today?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to get to talk to you. I've been watching your YouTube videos for a long time. It's kind of exciting to get to talk to you face to face.
Well, I appreciate that.
So I have been learning Spanish off and on through most of my life. Took Spanish in high school, that kind of thing. Went to Mexico and, started picking up little bits and pieces, came home, never used it. And so I'm one of those Spanish speakers that I can read a little bit of Spanish, but when someone starts talking to me in Spanish on the street, I can't follow what they're saying. I just am not picking up 1 out of 5 words, maybe. And I'm one of those. What kind of things can I do to improve that? What would be a good technique for picking up a second language and developing those listening skills?
One of the things is I teach Spanish online, and I've taught it to law enforcement officers over the years, but I almost failed it in high school. I was terrible at it. Had no aptitude. In fact, my Spanish teacher at the time, Miss Arroyo, I still remember her name, said, some people just do not have an aptitude for a foreign language. True story. But you fast forward, and I had to learn it on my own. Working as a deputy sheriff in Polk County in Florida, we had a very large migrant population, most of whom were from Mexico. Mm-hmm. And when I say large, I'm talking tens of thousands of people and an influx of tens of thousands. And so I had no choice. You're getting emergency calls, things like that. And what I started to do is, a lot of the Spanish programs are always like, okay, ignore that you know a language and try to learn this one like you would as a baby, just expose yourself. And that didn't work for me. And what I realized is it's a huge advantage that you already have a language. That's your paradigm. You already understand sentence structure. You already understand things. So what I do, the way I teach it is I show you what's similar between English and Spanish. So it's easy for you. I show you little tricks to use your English and to convert it into Spanish. And then on the other hand, I'll also explain the differences in a way that it makes sense to an English speaker. So I'll be like, think of it this way. So at first what I was doing is I was using my English to make sentences with these little tricks that I came up with. And when you fast forward a while, and I ended up marrying a woman who was originally from Colombia, and we went to see her uncle, who is on the highest court in Colombia. Very intimidated by this man. Mm-hmm. He was on the Constitutional Court, one of the justices, and I hadn't been speaking Spanish very long, and he's going, you speak grammatically correct Spanish all the time. He goes, how do you have an ear for the language? And I said, I have no ear for your language whatsoever. I have none. Nothing sounds right. Nothing sounds wrong. I said, I'm using my English and these little techniques to make sentences. I'm using like deductive reasoning, and I'm spitting out a sentence I may never have heard or read, but it's following this little pattern, and I'm guessing it's correct. And he's like, it's correct. So that's what I, as an adult, focusing on the similarities in the language and trying to use your language as a stepping stone to communicate, I think is the best way.
Now, you referenced that you were in law enforcement. And so was it on the job that pushed you to learn Spanish seriously, like to really commit to it?
Yeah, it was definitely the job because it was every day. I was working those areas, that part of the county, and it's not even just traffic stops. And at first, my goal was that I could just communicate on a traffic stop.
Right.
Let alone people are calling about domestic violence, which is more complex, obviously.
Yeah.
You're also talking about civil disturbances. Somebody didn't pay somebody for something, and then having to explain all these things. It was like a total immersion Spanish program that you had to be a part of, And we didn't have a lot of translators back then, so we would have to look for children, to help translate. That's not ideal.
No, especially in a domestic situation. Yeah.
Yeah, so I said, I'm just going to take it seriously. Even though my Spanish teacher said, I have no aptitude, I'm going to do this. And using those techniques and being around it all the time. Well, also I had to be able to testify in court, so I had to be good. You know?
Right.
And so when I first started going to court, and they're like, what formal training do you have in Spanish? And I really couldn't show them my D from high school. I was like, I got to do something. So I went down and took the Spanish CLEP test and got maximum credit for it. So I started showing that. And the defense attorney started to attack me, so I had to get better. I did thousands of translations in my career and have never been successfully challenged in court on my Spanish, and they've tried.
Man, now how long did it take you to go from, Spanish high school did not go well to I can testify in court in a second language? How long a time period was that for you?
I was pretty comfortable with basic investigations, traffic stops, could do all that, testify to all of those things, that I understood what was being said, make an arrest within 2 years.
Oh, wow. And you credit the immersion, like the amount of time every day you had to spend in Spanish, or your techniques, or both?
I think it's really a combination. If it was just the techniques and I didn't have the necessity to push, then I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. I'd go watch TV or something,
Yeah.
But when you learn it and you go to work, and I could get to a certain point, and then I'd hit a wall, and I'd be frustrated, go learn a little more. It was that constant push, really.
Yeah. Now, you were talking about immersion, and people think of a cop in Florida and assuming that primarily you're going to be speaking to people from Cuba. Mm-hmm. How was it that you were listening to mostly people from Mexico?
People always think that. Yeah, you're right. When I say, they're like, why don't you speak Cuban Spanish? How do you speak Mexican Spanish? And it was just where we were between Orlando and Tampa. It was just a very large, citrus area. And then right next to us, we had strawberries. And so a lot of the migrant workers were coming from Mexico. There were some Central American, but mostly Mexico. So I learned their accent. I learned their slang. So
and that's
there was
important too, right? That's to not diversify too much when you're learning.
I tell people to choose a country or you're going to be frustrated. Otherwise, you're going to keep getting conflicting information. Even about, you think about English. If you wanted to learn, American English, you wouldn't get a tutor from Ireland,
Right.
But people try to get a little bit from everywhere, and that doesn't work. So I'm always like, focus. But I actually learned it so well that there was a point that I was doing undercover operations in Spanish on the phone.
Oh,
because they couldn't place my accent. So they kept talking.
Sure.
But so most of our Spanish speakers were from Puerto Rican, because they're all U.S. citizens, so they can become law enforcement very easily in Florida.
Uh-huh.
And we were doing a lot of immigration things, like counterfeit immigration cards, and I was an expert in that. And so every time they would talk on the phone, their accent stood out, and the person would be like, "You're a cop. You're a cop. You're a cop."
I can tell you're from
With
Puerto
me,
Rico.
They're like, "I don't know what you are." They just kept talking.
That's awesome. That's great. If I'm getting a little bit of Spanish from Spain, a little bit of Spanish from Cuba, a little bit of Spanish from Mexico, that's probably actually hindering how quickly I'm developing an ear, right?
Yeah, it's definitely hindering. And I've tried to make the YouTube channel. I actually started the YouTube channel after I retired from law enforcement. We moved to Mexico because it's cheaper.
Yeah.
Got a little condo down there, and a lot of the neighbors are like, hey, they're from the U.S. or Canada. A lot were police also.
Oh, really?
Yeah, retired. And they said, hey, can you teach us Spanish? And I'm like, no, I just want to sit on a beach, But I'll tell you what, I'll make some lessons and put them on YouTube, and you can watch them when you want, but I'm not going to meet with you every day. Right. That's kind of how the channel started. And now it's kind of grown to about 9% of my audience is from the UK. Another 3% from Spain, people from the UK living in Spain. Right. So their Spanish is different. And all of a sudden, I have to be more neutral. So I'm teaching as neutral Spanish as I can. Right. But so every lesson is, okay, like if I'm going to teach you the trunk of a car, that word is different. Like in Mexico, it's cajuela, and like in Colombia, it's baúl, and some places maletero, and like just the words for everything change, It's so frustrating.
Sure. Just like it does in English.
I usually recommend Mexican Spanish because it's the largest Spanish-speaking country in the world, the proximity to the U.S., obviously.
And then you've also talked about having a source of Spanish speaking that you expose yourself to every day, like listening to the news. What do you recommend like that?
I think, especially, when I was learning, it was very pre-internet, obviously, so, I didn't have that advantage. But nowadays, you have every advantage. You can go and watch the news from the particular country that you're focusing on their Spanish, they all have their own YouTube channels. That's probably the best. You can watch TV shows easily. You can even go and practice your Spanish with Chat GPT, that new AI. Yeah. You can talk to it. It'll talk back if you use the voice module. Have conversations with it.
Yeah, that may be slightly less intimidating than going to a native speaker. I think that for a lot of us trying to pick up a second language, we are embarrassed to talk to a native speaker until we reach a certain level of competency, but we can't reach that competency without speaking to native speakers.
Yeah, you get stuck at a certain level. And, when I was translating at work, I had to. So, I was very comfortable. Mm-hmm. And then, again, meeting my wife's uncle, the Supreme Court Justice, he would leave the Supreme Court there in Colombia, the Constitutional Court, every day and come to his parents' house where we stayed. And you'd see the whole police procession outside. He'd come up and see them. For 3 days, I didn't speak to him. He'd spend about 30 minutes there. He assumed I could not speak Spanish, and I wasn't telling him.
Right.
I just said, hi. And so my wife on the third day goes, my husband can talk to you. And I'm like, no, don't say that. and I'm feeling that, that paralysis almost. You're like, I don't. Yeah. He walks over to me and in Spanish, he says, can you speak Spanish? So I'm like, yes, sir. And I'm hoping, this is going to go well, but I'm so nervous, and I speak Spanish all the time at work. And he goes, can I ask you a question? I said, yes, sir. What do you think of the U.S. monetary policy and the fact that your country gets richer at the expense of developing nations like mine? And I went,
Yeah. It's like, I have none of the vocabulary to answer that question.
And I was like, I don't think I can answer that in English. I was like, yeah. And so he goes, that's what I thought, and got on the elevator and left.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Was not a very good first impression, I don't think.
Well, I was actually going to ask you about the failures of you're doing a traffic stop or you're at someone's house because it's a domestic call or whatever, and you're just not understanding what they're saying, and they can tell you can't understand, and maybe you fear that that's going to be really embarrassing. I don't know if you have any examples, but...
Yeah, it's always... I have a lot of those because there's a progression in learning, and a lot of times it's pronunciation. Like pies are your feet, but it's spelled like pies, you eat, like in English. So the first time I used it on a scene, I was, separate their pies,
Yeah, right.
When I was doing arrests, and they keep looking at me. And they're all confused. Then they point, and they're like, pies? And I'm like, oh, pies. Okay, that's how you learn. Oh, it's embarrassing. Okay, it's not pies. You get those things like that. There was another time where I went to translate on a battery, and the guy said, and I understood everything, except he goes, yeah. And then he grabbed a cat, gato, and he hit me in the head with the cat. And I'm just really puzzled. And I repeat it back. You got hit with a gato. He goes, yeah, hit me in the head with a gato. And he's bleeding. So I'm like, I'm just confused. And the deputy's like, what is he saying? I'm like, I think he was hit in the head with a cat. He goes, you're not very good at this, are you? So then I learned that the tire jack is called a gato, but I learned it on that call.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So is it possible to avoid the embarrassment of being a learner? I mean, you're going to probably have to encounter that, right? And it might even be good for you, right?
I think it's good, and people are usually fairly helpful. They're appreciative, especially Spanish, because they're appreciative that you're trying to learn anyway. So they tend to, they assist you with that. It gets more embarrassing as you get better with the language, because then you're held to a higher standard, and that's when they get more picky. Especially like me doing the YouTube channel, and here I am, a non-native speaker, teaching Spanish. The channel had 550,000 views last month. So I get a lot of feedback, obviously.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So if anything is off, somebody's going to jump on it. And I actually get attacked more for my English than my Spanish.
Really?
Yeah. All the time.
What in the world? What? I shouldn't be surprised. I mean, people on the internet, they will complain just for the sake of complaining, but they criticize you for your native language.
Yeah, well, I get very precise with the Spanish because I know that that's where you expect to be attacked. So I make sure my stuff's squared away. But I get in the English sometimes, and somebody jumped on me. I said, "Oh, the woman that lives in that house," instead of "who lives in that house," and they're all over that. Yes, my goodness, that's incorrect, or this is incorrect, or.
Yeah, I just saw you mention that this week, actually.
So I was like, well, that's why I don't teach English.
But you actually had a reason for doing that. You were maybe compromising the English slightly deliberately because it would help in understanding the Spanish. And so I felt like that was justifiable.
Yeah, and actually that video you're talking about, some other people brought up some things that I was like, I should put that in there. So I pulled it, and I'm going to refilm that today.
Oh, really?
So
okay.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the interaction with people, because I feel like it's still a way to help people,
Yeah.
So I wrote a book. I have a book out, Functional Police Spanish.
Yes.
It also does interview techniques to get around gaps. It tells you how to testify correctly to not get jammed up. And so when I had that book go out, suddenly had all these PhDs and EDDs and stuff write me, and they wanted to debate aspects of the book or debate parts of my teaching. And I'm like, I don't care. Like, I'm not interested in doing any of that. Yeah. And then one of them came out. She wanted to ride with me, and I said no. So she contacted the sheriff directly. She was out of St. Petersburg. And so he said she had to ride with me. So she's in the car, and she's American. She's speaking Spanish. That's her whole degrees in. She runs a translation school. But she's got a pretty thick American accent. But I'm answering in English because I'm just like, again, a little bit of intimidated, Yeah. I don't want to be judged for things. I mean, I learned in the street, Yeah. So as we leave the substation, car goes by, truck, no taillights, anything. I stop him. It's like I had this thing staged because it's a Mexican guy, no English, no driver's license. Everything's a mess. So I make sure there's no weapon. She gets out. It's a lot of translation, get the car towed, have somebody come transport, because I'm a lieutenant at the time. And we go to the next thing. So she's quiet after we left. I said, so what do you think? She goes, well, first I'm thinking you speak Spanish a lot better than I do.
Oh, wow.
and she goes, I'm really, really impressed. And she goes, where did you learn that? I said, in the streets.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so for the whole rest of the shift in between calls and doing things, and there were a few other translations I had to go to, she kept wanting to debate why I teach things in a certain way. And I said, because it makes sense to my English speaking brain. And when I explain it to other people, it makes sense to some of them too. Yeah. And so she actually started to work my techniques into her latest book and some other things. It was really weird. Yeah.
There's a little bit of that with chaplaincy. There are people who got advanced degrees in theology, and they've just collected doctorates, right? And most chaplaincy doesn't pay unless you are maybe a hospital chaplain. And so you get into police chaplaincy, which is almost entirely volunteer, and you run into these gatekeepers. And they're like, well, you didn't go through what I went through, and you're not credentialed in the same way that I'm credentialed. And wow, are they territorial. And it's like, I just want to help cops. I don't care. You can wear your jacket that says chaplain and have breakfast with the mayor, but I just want to do ride-alongs and roll calls. And can you just leave me alone, I don't want to debate
It's,
you. I don't want to take anything from you. I just want to help. And so,
yeah, it is like that. I get the same thing. Are you credentialed in Spanish? What degree do you like? Who are you to teach this on YouTube? Or
how dare you have a YouTube channel?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my.
I do get that.
Yeah. But the marketplace of ideas, there are going to be people who would rather learn their Spanish on YouTube than at the university and not pay $100,000 to do it at the university and frankly be more successful. And I feel like the YouTube channel should have the right to compete with the university program. And it's not that it would completely replace it or anything like that, but let good content rise to the top. I don't like gatekeepers who are trying to hold things down because somebody didn't, get credentialed the right way or jump through the correct hoop or whatever. I don't like that. That's
No, but it's definitely going to happen.
I feel like what you're doing as a second chapter, where you did a career in law enforcement and then you found yourself teaching Spanish on YouTube, you're still helping people and you're still using those communication skills and the teaching that you learned as you were, because a lot of cops are put in a spot where they have to train other people and teach other people and give lectures and that kind of thing. And you're using all of those skills, and this has been fairly successful for you. What would you advise other cops who are thinking, this career is going to end someday, I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. How can they move into a job, teaching and contributing and helping people online?
And I've met a lot of law enforcement officers because actually there was a mini chapter between the Spanish chapter. When I went to Mexico, I started writing about living in Mexico, and I taught a lot of legal things in the U.S. That was my thing. I like to teach legal at the academy and stuff. So I became a writer. And then a lot of police officers would, who want to move to Mexico would follow. And they ended up moving to that area. We started calling that complex Copland. So I met retired cops all the time. And, they tend to come, younger than a lot of, professions.
Oh, yeah.
And the first thing they want to do is nothing. And they don't want to be around people. They're like, I don't want to be around people. I'm going to just do that. And then after like a month, they're like, okay, I got to do something.
Yeah.
And I always tell them, you don't always know what it's going to be when you retire, but you kind of look around and you're like, what do I enjoy? And when we all first retire, and I did too, I wanted a break from people. You don't want to interact with people quite as much, just want to worry about yourself. But then all of those things that made you a law enforcement officer are still there. So you want to have some fulfillment there. And then I suddenly see these people who were introverted for a month or two or maybe 6 months suddenly go right back to being more extroverted, wanting to help people. Yeah. And there's so many opportunities to teach, and do things online. You can start your YouTube channel for absolutely nothing. I have a friend, he can fix anything. I'm encouraging him to start a YouTube channel, and just because he has these little hacks,
Yeah.
And it's a great way to teach, and people think that it's kind of a one-way direction, do the videos and you don't have any interaction, but you have a lot of interaction.
Yeah.
The comments section has been, at first I was like, well, why are these people writing me? but then I was like, oh, that's a great question, or that's give me an idea, or I'm really glad I could help people. And, some of the comments that I've been getting lately, like somebody wrote and they donated virtual coffees, to me. People do that. And they said, I've studied Spanish for decades, and suddenly the way you explain it makes sense. Thank you so much. Everything's changed for me. And that really encourages me, and motivates me to stand in front of my cell phone and say and teach people Spanish. Yeah. So I get a lot of fulfillment, and I don't have to keep a set schedule, so I can travel or do whatever.
Did you catch lightning in a bottle? Is your path something that can be replicated by other people? Do you feel like your friend who has these little home improvement kind of, hacks, is he going to be able to do what you're doing and actually earn income? Or should that even be your goal?
Yeah, I think that the goal at first, it's always, you're like, hey, I'd like to make some extra, money to do some things with. But I think the goal at first is just to create this thing, like to enjoy the creativity process is kind of what I liked. That's kind of how it started, but it can definitely be replicated because I've done it on 2 different channels, talking about completely different things. So I have another one where I talk about, retiring in Mexico. That has 94,000 people, subscribers right now. That's been around for 2 years. This one now is at 64,000, but I'm gaining 300 a day. But I'm talking about completely different things to completely different audiences. It can definitely be replicated.
And I don't want you to say any numbers, but your YouTube efforts are paying pretty well. They're paying better than your pension, right?
Yeah, they do pay. They pay better than the pension. And it comes from, and because I told somebody that the other day, a friend, and he goes, how does it make any money? I don't even understand how it's working. Where's it coming from? And it comes from, the ad revenue. Mm-hmm. When you see those little ads on YouTube that annoy people, but that's what pays people. And then you get people that are just happy to have the advice, and they'll just donate $5 or $10 here through that or through Buy Me a Coffee. Some of the other things are, I recommended a Spanish grammar book that's the only one you'll ever need. It's a reference guide. I said, it's just one book. You'll never need another one. Whether you're a beginner, advanced, everything's in there. It's like $50 on Amazon if you just use my link. It's not my book, know.
But that affiliate link pays you.
Right. So I'll tell you that just on that affiliate link was $2,800 on that link.
Wow. From people buying that book, and you get a little cut from it. That's amazing. And
there's business offers too. Like the email fills up, and it can be whatever you want to do. And even smaller channels. I have a friend, he has 5,000. He's from Atlanta originally, retired, same thing. Yeah. He has a channel about 5,000 or 6,000 people. And although it doesn't make as much like with ad revenue and things, he gets referrals. He's more of a techie. He helps people set up VPNs. He does some consulting. So suddenly this has become a decent income source that he never thought he'd have.
Yeah, I have a model with my podcast where the podcast is not monetized, but it is absolutely benefiting me because it's putting me in a position where I am the name that people think of when they need an expert on police chaplaincy. And that is putting me in a position to network with people and make connections. And like I said, I'm not trying to take advantage of that at this stage, but it's helpful to have all these connections. And, I could see someone building actually a business model on, okay, I want to be a consultant or something else, and I'm going to make myself the expert in a field by producing online content. And that is a way to do that. The content itself doesn't have to be monetized, but it might lead you to getting hired, doing something
That's
else.
exactly it. And I tell people, especially if they have a business, some folks that I talked to somebody and he does air conditioner repair, and we were talking about YouTube. And he goes, I said, if you just do videos about your business, nobody likes commercials. But if you do little businesses where you share little tips for people, things like that, people get to know you. They get to know your personality. Yeah. And if they want to call an air conditioner company and they happen to see you on YouTube and you're in that area, you're going to go right to the top of the list. Yeah. There's a connection there. When I started doing blogging and stuff for Mexico, that's what happened. I did writing there for a while. That did very well. And then suddenly I was asked to speak at seminars, and businesses were reaching out and wanted me, to partner with me. And you've got CEOs of companies calling you. And my only expertise was that people were starting to listen to me. Yeah. But one guy wrote, and he goes, I have $800,000 to invest in Mexico, and I want to fly in and meet with you. And I said, you do realize I'm like a retired cop. My wife's like a retired social worker. I don't know where you got this other idea. Yeah. But it was like that all the time. Yeah. So that's something maybe people don't always think about, but it's free to start YouTube, and it's a learning curve like anything else.
Sure. I noticed that you've not done a lot of animation lately.
No, people didn't like the anime. I did that for the neighbors because it was easy to do and quiet in the morning. So I had little animated cartoons, and then once I changed to myself because I couldn't afford the animation subscription anymore, then suddenly the channel took off and people, they wanted to see a real person. They want to,
Yeah.
have that connection.
That's just some adaptability too. I think sometimes when cops are thinking about, okay, what's my second career going to be? They have this really rigid idea of, this is this idea it's been in my back pocket for 20 years, and I'm going to do it, and it's going to be exactly like this. But you need to have some flexibility because that idea may not have aged well, and you may need to change or be able to pivot a little bit and still do your thing, but maybe not exactly in the way that you thought it was going to be.
Well, and I know what that's like because when I was going to retire, I get to 25 years, and the sheriff came to me. He says, Paul, you're a young man. You don't have to retire. I said, sir, if you'll call my wife and convince her I don't have to retire, I'll stay because I'm having a good time.
Yeah.
But that wasn't going to happen. But my plan was actually to move to Mexico and open a microbrewery.
So really?
I had taken some online courses. I was more to the management aspect of it. I was going to have somebody to actually do the brewing. I had done all of these things to prep for it, and I got there, and that just wasn't going to work out. So I was like, wow, that's not going to work out. I've got to kind of look for another avenue here.
Right.
And then, but there's always something else.
So what do you feel, I don't want you to have to commit to anything, but what do you feel about this career? Do you think that you'll be teaching Spanish online for a long time? Do you just want to do it as long as it makes sense? Or what's your attitude about this current path you're on?
It came really at a good time because I was teaching more about being in Mexico because we were there for 6 years. And then, like we talked about, life happens and things don't always work out. Yeah. And so my wife's mother started having some cognitive issues in the U.S., and we couldn't just lay on a beach anymore. So we came back to the U.S., and we travel as much as we can, but we're in the U.S. a lot. So I actually was ending my chapter or winding it down on teaching people about Mexico. Right. I was like, I just need something else. And here's this Spanish channel that I had for neighbors that just kind of sat in the back and just sat there. And then just suddenly it became something. And so now that's another avenue.
Yeah.
So it may not be there forever, but it's doing well now,
One aspect of retiring is saying that, well, I'll never work in law enforcement again. That is closed. That is behind me. I'll never go back. However, tell me what happened on your path when you came back to the States.
That basically, I had the same thing. I said, I'll never get back into it, lived in Mexico, and then ended up around COVID. I was visiting the States at first, and then they were like, hey, can you teach at the police academy? I'm like, well, my instructor certifications are out. Oh, no, we just have to, sign some papers, things get done, because we have to split up the academy. So that got me into it a little bit,
right.
And then we had to come back full time, and then I've had several job offers. So one of them I'm actually going to go with and start full time as a lieutenant with the Florida Southwestern State College Police Department. So the chief there, I trained him when he first got promoted at my old agency. So we have that connection. Right. So the guy who says never does it again. But it's why you never say never.
Put on the uniform and go right back, which you're not going back to the same department you retired from. That is a little bit different. So a little bit of a change of scenery. Will you be on the street at all? Will it be mostly administrative?
At that rank, it's mostly administrative. They have campuses over 4 counties, so the officers are spread out. But it's a little bit different because, I won't have to be in the streets, not bar fights, it's higher ed, so it'll be something different.
Well, I appreciate you doing that. We're everywhere across the country. We are hurting for manpower. And a lot of people are retiring the moment they're eligible. And I don't blame them. They're burned out. They need a break. But for those who can come back and contribute and help out in some kind of way, that's a noble thing. And I appreciate it.
I can tell you that I was working as a reserve there for a little while I've been pondering the full-time job and assisting with hiring. And the majority of people we hire are retired law enforcement officers.
Really?
Normally from other states that came to Florida, and they're like, okay, what now? And they wait a while, same thing. And then they don't want to go to bar fights and things, but they're like, oh, higher education, nice campus. Sure. This seems like a pretty good job.
Sure. I see that a little bit with small rural agencies where it's a little slower pace, and you see people coming from larger cities, and they move out to the country and think, actually, I wouldn't mind working part-time at the local department here. And they end up finding themselves right back into it again. And so, well, I hope that's a blessing to you. I hope it goes well. And please keep producing content. Even those of us who cannot understand our Spanish very well yet, we are watching your videos and we're learning, and it's really helpful. Your style of teaching is genuinely helpful, and I feel like I've picked up a lot just from you, and I really do appreciate it.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's nice to hear.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul. I want to thank Paul for coming on and talking about his second chapter, Teaching Spanish Online. His style of teaching a second language really connects with me, and I hope you'll like it too. If you want to learn more from him, subscribe to his YouTube channel, Spanish with QRoo Paul. That's Queen Robert Ocean, Paul common spelling, QRoo Paul. And I hope that this conversation also has you thinking about your second chapter. Maybe it's not about the money, but you absolutely have to be productive. After a short season of doing nothing in retirement, you're going to want to be involved in something. Build something, teach something, contribute to and help other people. You've really got to do it. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
Well, they did an amazing job with shotguns and a 6-shooter. You know, the deputies were policing the Wild West with the same thing they had 100 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, a shotgun and a 6-shooter. And then county issued soft lead so it wouldn't go through walls, you know.
Right.
But they did an astonishing job. I mean, shotguns are very effective for certain things. But yes, that they were the outgunned, and the fact that they did bring to bear pretty much the only, it happened to be an M16 that was thrown out the window by a drug dealer. They actually confiscated it when a drug dealer threw it out the window of a vehicle on the freeway. They picked it up and had, you know, road burns on it and everything. One guy grabbed it essentially out of the evidence lock, not trained on it, and made his way up to the front of the pursuit and brought it to bear at the ambush site when they were standing on the road, the robbers. 2 of them were shooting .223s, one was shooting a .308. So there was 3 semi-automatics on that side. And when he jumped out and sprayed gunfire around there, they did, that's when they turned and got out of there.
If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, pray for peace in our city.